Okay, picture the scene. It's the Chinese Grand Prix. It's this incredibly demanding circuit, all about aerodynamic perfection. But as the cars line up on the grid, something is just wrong. Two spots are empty. The iconic papaya orange of McLaren, nowhere to be seen. How on earth does that even happen? Let's get into it.
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How does a team at the absolute peak of motorsport, a team with drivers like Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri fighting for wins, just completely fail to even start a race? The answer is this wild collision of logistics, super strict regulations, and some seriously high-stakes engineering.
So the first piece of this whole crazy puzzle doesn't start on the track. Nope. It starts thousands of feet in the air as part of what people in the paddock call the invisible race. This unbelievable effort to move the entire sport from one continent to the next. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, Formula One is basically a traveling circus that weighs around 1,500 tons. Now, yeah, some of the non-critical stuff can go by sea, but the heart of the operation, the cars, the power units, the real good stuff, that all gets moved on chartered cargo flights. And right there, that is where the first domino fell for McLaren. A total freak logistical failure. One of the main cargo planes, the one carrying the chassis and the power units, was grounded. This wasn't a spare front wing or a couple of toolboxes we're talking about. This was the absolute core of their entire racing operation, just stuck on a tarmac thousands of miles from the track. And this timeline, man, it just lays out the disaster so clearly. While all their rivals are in Shanghai setting up their garages, McLaren's most important gear is still a full 36 hours away. You know, in a sport where milliseconds decide races, a day and a half is just, it's an eternity. And critically, it meant they blew past a deadline you simply cannot miss. And that missed deadline, that leads us straight to the second huge barrier. Arriving late was obviously bad, but arriving late in the world of Formula One means you're about to run headfirst into a solid brick wall of rules, all enforced by the FIA. This is hurdle number one. It's something every single team has to clear, no exceptions. It's called initial scrutineering. Before a car can even think about touching the track for a practice session, FIA officials have to go over it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it's safe and follows all the technical rules. But with their cars not even in the country, McLaren obviously couldn't do this. And this is what everyone was wondering, right? A plane got grounded. That is clearly 100% outside of the team's control. So why couldn't the race stewards just look at the situation and grant them a waiver? Give them a break. Well, this is where two massive principles just slammed into each other. On one side, you have this concept called force majeure, which is basically a rule for completely unforeseeable events, exactly like a grounded plane. But that idea ran smack into the notoriously strict Parc Fermé rules. Parc Fermé basically locks a car's setup before qualifying to keep everything fair. The FIA's position was that allowing an uninspected car to join the party late would completely break that rule and undermining integrity of the whole event. And this was the final, absolutely brutal verdict from the stewards. From a purely regulatory standpoint, since the cars were not presented for scrutineering by the deadline, they had never officially entered the Grand Prix weekend. In the eyes of the rulebook, it was like they were never even there. But you know what? Even if the regulators had somehow bent the rules, there was a final and honestly probably the most important reason McLaren had to stay in the garage. And this one comes down to pure engineering and, most importantly, driver safety. This is the suggestion we all saw blowing up on social media, right? Just work through the night, throw the cars together, skip qualifying, and just start from the pit lane. Sounds simple enough, but this is where the mind-bending complexity of a modern F1 car really comes into play. Today's F1 cars, like the McLaren, rely almost entirely on this concept called ground effect. The floor of the car is basically an upside-down airplane wing. It creates this massive low-pressure area that literally sucks the car onto the road. That's the secret sauce behind the incredible cornering speeds we see every weekend. And here's where it gets really dangerous. That floor is an absolute masterpiece of carbon fiber, and it's sensitive down to the millimeter. Rushing its assembly is a gigantic risk. If just one single support is misaligned by even 2 millimeters, that's barely the thickness of a coin, you could have a sudden, catastrophic loss of downforce at over 200 miles an hour. The car becomes unstable, unpredictable, and just fundamentally unsafe. And honestly, this quote from the McLaren team principal just says it all. The final call was made. Without the proper time to build the car, to check it, to double-check the structural integrity of that hypersensitive floor, and the incredibly complex hybrid power unit, they were simply not willing to risk their drivers' lives. It was a safety decision, plain and simple. So the team packed up their gear without turning a single wheel in anger. But the fallout from missing just one race weekend in Formula One is, well, it's absolutely severe. Officially, when you look back at the history books for the Chinese Grand Prix, you'll see 3 letters next to the names of both McLaren drivers. DNS. Did not start. Just 2 empty slots on the grid where a podium-contending team should have been. And the financial hit? It's staggering. We're talking millions of dollars. See, every single point in the Constructors' Championship is tied directly to huge amounts of prize money at the end of the year. Missing an entire race is a catastrophic loss of opportunity, and the financial pain from that is felt for the rest of the season. At the end of the day, this whole saga is just a brutal reminder of what Formula One truly is. It's so much more than just a bunch of drivers racing on a Sunday. It is a relentless week-in, week-out competition of global supply chains, complex international law, and millimeter-perfect engineering. And when just one tiny gear in that massive machine slips, the whole show can grind to a halt. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. In a world where global logistics seem to get crazier every year, should the FIA build more flexibility into its rules for these kinds of disasters? Or is that tough, the show must go on attitude part of what makes Formula One the unforgiving, elite sport that it is? It's a heck of a debate, and there's definitely no easy answer.